Hey there, I'm Rod Yates. Welcome to another episode of Humans of Music, a Jaxsta podcast. Each episode I talk to a music creator or industry professional about their life and career, the ups and downs of their journey, and the lessons they've learned along the way. And my guest today is the Hold Steady frontman, Craig Finn. The Hold Steady recently released their 8th full-length record, Open Door Policy. It's an album in every sense of the word, with ebbs and flows, dynamic musical shifts, and boisterous barroom rock nestling alongside creeping musical passages. It's all offset by Craig's formidable lyrical storytelling, delivered in his trademark sung-spoken way. We talk about how he developed that style in this interview and how he went from attending hardcore shows in Minneapolis as a kid to playing in acclaimed underground band Lifter Puller before moving to New York to form the Hold Steady. We also talk about what it was like finding fame in his 30s, his DIY approach to booking early tours, and much more. We started though by talking about Open Door Policy and how even though the album was written and largely recorded in 2019, its lyrical themes took on even more meaning in 2020.
2019, when we were writing this record, felt like a heavy year to me. Not as heavy as the year to come, but we live in a divided political climate over here. I was thinking about that, income inequality, sort of this late stage capitalism and consumerism, and how that all affects mental health. So, as we wrote this record in 2019, these are all themes that are kind of coming into the record. 2020 comes along and all these things go through the roof sort of as topics. These are topics we talk about. These are things we're all thinking about suddenly. So in some sense, 2020 helped age the record in a pertinent fashion to me. And that was unforeseen, but I don't want to say welcome because 2020 was a lot of pain, but it did make it seem timely in some way.
Hopefully in 2021, we're heading into a little bit of light. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. In that regard, even though the themes became more relevant in 2020, is it almost like now we're hopefully seeing some light at the end of the tunnel? You want to almost put some of those themes to bed? Or is that too naive a way of thinking?
Well, what I would say about that is that the Hold Steady has always had kind of an interesting relationship with the audience, with sort of harsh or depressing topics or something. And I think one of the things that I hope for this record is that even though there's heaviness, that when we all are able to commune and get together in a room and hoist, pints in the air while we sing these songs, it will be a celebration of what we've come through.
Yeah.
And an acknowledgement. I mean, anytime you sing a sad song with a crowd, you're kind of acknowledging we all get sad, we all suffer, but it's part of being a human, and that by standing around a bunch of humans, that somehow makes you feel better.
Yeah.
And so I hope there is something like that, a release. I feel like we're due that release with this material.
How emotional do you think that first show will be when you hoist your pints in the air?
Yeah, so Franz, our piano player, and I were talking about this, and I honestly, I don't want to scare you away from buying tickets, but I think I might be a little bit of an emotional mess. I kind of tear up easily,
right? And
I think I think it'll be extremely emotional. I'm honestly saying I hope it won't hinder the performance, but I'm guessing that there will be tears shed all around the first time we get to do it kind of properly.
Yeah, lyrically the album is as vibrant and detail heavy as ever. You think about songs such as Spices, where you sing of a woman who orders a vanilla vodka in a Diet Dr. Pepper, or you think of Family Farm, where you sing about a nurse with eruption for a ringtone. This minutiae in your lyrics, how much is from your imagination and how much is from hearing little conversations?
Well, it is all in my imagination, but I am kind of a habitual eavesdropper, and I get a lot from just books and one of the things I missed about this past year is travel, and I don't mean travel in the sense of like being on top of a mountain. I mean, getting to the show the night before and having a beer in the Hilton, the Garden Inn,
Right.
And that kind of incidental travel. And that is really where I get a lot of creativity. So I have missed that. But, I do love sort of the relationship in a song, which I sort of feel like is a short story, is the closest literary equivalent of details, what to put in and what to leave out. And I think there's almost like a real symmetry or like Jenga game where you're pulling things out or putting them in, and a balance to find. And I love, maybe giving certain details on certain things, but let other things be kind of wholly unanswered to build that sort of tension.
Right. So is there a nurse with Eruption for a ringtone?
Well, there's a nurse in my apartment, and my partner and my girlfriend is Angie. She's a nurse.
Sure.
But Eruption was a funny thing, and no, I made that part up is the short answer. But that's a funny thing because that song was written in 2019, and Eddie Van Halen died in the past year, and a lot of people when they talk about the Hold Steady's influences, bring up things like Bruce Springsteen or the Replacements. But, Van Halen was kind of a model as well. There's a lot of guitar solos, and then there's a guy who kind of talks and yells. And
yeah.
That early Van Halen stuff is something I think we all love.
So did his passing impact you, Eddie's?
Yeah, it did. I think I was never like I wanted to be a songwriter. So like I was never the guy putting two hands on a fretboard and try to play real fast. Some of my bandmates were those people, But man, like that sort of, growing up in the Midwest and seeing Van Halen with those great like Beach Boys harmonies, and it felt like, wow, if I could just get to California, maybe I'd be cooler than I am now. And I never really did move to California, but like there was just something really exciting about that music. And I think when you looked, when he passed and I started watching videos and stuff, he looked like he was having a great time when he played guitar. And there's a lot to be said for that.
Absolutely. You talked earlier about what you leave out in your lyrics, and I wanted to ask you about the opening lines of the album in the song The Feelers. It was an early morning meet-up at the mansion on the mountain. The maestro still had glitter on his face. So evocative, and it paints such a picture, but also leaves so much out and leaves so much to the imagination. I mean, 2-point question. How important are the opening lines of a song and an album? And also, how did you develop that art of knowing what to leave out and knowing how to still make something evocative without including all the details?
The first part of the question, opening an album, I think there's a sort of choice, and you have two choices, in the Hold Steady, we have sort of two different types of openers. One is knockout punch right away, and the other is invite you in. And this one felt like an invite you in, and I felt like that really was like, okay, you're gonna step inside this record, like we've just sort of opened the film or whatever. And so I liked that, and the mystery of like, well, first of all, who's the maestro?
Right.
And the idea that he has glitter on his face, which could be for any reason, but you get the feeling he's been up all night, right? And that was what it was supposed to inspire. And I think like that kind of thing, I mean, again, I think a song's, one of the equivalents is a short story, and you have limited real estate. I mean, usually when we write a song with the Hold Steady, the first draft, so to speak, is like 5 minutes long. And then we were like, well, let's try to make it 4. And then you have to start thinking about, well, what can we take out without losing the plot? But, sometimes it also, when you're dealing with a song rather than a novel, it's sometimes nice to leave enough space for the listener to kind of insert their own hopes and dreams and their own vision of this. And so to not explain every little bit of it to them, because I think that's how what people fall in love with a little bit is when they can understand it their own way.
Growing up, was there an artist or a song or an album where you noticed that and that started to I guess, set a little light bulb off?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of songs that told stories were really exciting to me when I was younger. If you would have asked me this question a year or two ago, I might have had a different answer. But I've sort of been reflecting about there's a record. My parents didn't have a huge record collection, but they had some records. It was mainly kind of folky 70s light rock stuff, and they had Paul Simon's Greatest Hits was one that I would play a lot. And there's a song Duncan that he tells a story. A couple in the next room are bound to win a prize. He starts in the hotel room and he tells you, Lincoln Duncan is my name and here's my song. And that one unfolds and about his whole life. It's amazing. But the one that I just keep going back to on that same record is Slip Sliding Away. And he says, I know a man, he came from my hometown. He wears passion for his woman like a thorny crown. He said, Dolores, I live in... And I love how in the middle of the verse, he drops her name. And you haven't heard her name yet, but suddenly there's a detail there. Suddenly she has a name, and she almost like comes into focus for me in a way that she hadn't before. And I love that technique, and that's something I think I don't know, either been influenced by or bitten by, or bitten, taken as my own many times.
How old were you when you would have heard those songs?
Oh, 7, 8, those were, that was, that was probably like right when I started buying my own records. But that one was one that was exciting me. And again, another thing about that record is it had the lyrics printed on it, and that like I could follow along, and I really liked that. Kodachrome, me and Julio down by the schoolyard. It was, there's actually, I mean, I grew up in the Midwest, but like there's a lot of New York in that record too. Right. That maybe like an early view into like, wow, that place sounds cool.
Yeah. And so when you started buying your own records when you were about 7 years old, I understand that the Bay City Rollers were an early influence. Was that one of the bands whose albums you were buying?
That was my first record that I bought with my own money. Was the Bay City Rollers' greatest hits, and it seems like a weird choice because they obviously had kind of a teeny bopper, fan base, but those are really good songs. They're tightly constructed, and I joke that Saturday Night was my first really song that I loved on my own, and it almost was like, it came at a time where like I was being taught spelling. So SATUR, like it was kind of lining up with my interests at the time. But fast forward 5 years and getting into punk rock and the Ramones and things like that in my, early teens, there's not that much of a jump between Saturday Night and Blitzkrieg Bop. Mm-hmm. And they're almost like these football chants, right? And, some stuff like, real like street punk kind of things, or some, even The Clash. There's 3 chords and a good, hook, oftentimes sung by multiple people. And I still go back to those Bay City Roller records. It's actually a bit of a fascination of mine. I've read all the books about them and all that. Like I just can't let go. But Kiss was the next one, and that was certainly a huge band. And that was the first band. The Bay City Rollers is kind of a solitary pursuit. Kiss, my whole school loved Kiss. So that was like the first band I had with friends where we just share the records and whatnot.
Talking about, I guess, growing up and getting into music. So you grew up in Edina, in Minnesota. How would you describe Edina at that time?
Well, it's pronounced Edina.
Edina, okay.
Yeah. So I would say, it's a suburb. It's not far out of the city. It's a upscale suburb. It's sort of a maligned. If you're not from there, people tend to sort of make fun of you because it's got a little bit of money, and I think in particular it's very good at sports. So everyone's like, oh, Edina, the Hornets are the team, and the Hornets. Ice hockey is the big sport there, and they're very good at ice hockey. But it was a very suburban, and I mean suburban meaning there weren't sidewalks. I couldn't walk to a store. I could not it was probably like the nearest place to do a transaction of any sort commercially would be like a gas station a mile and a half away. So okay. So it was just neighborhood, a lot of kids around. It was fine. I mean, I made a lot of good friends. I ended up changing schools, but I did have some good friends from there.
Okay. What did your parents do?
My mom stayed at home, and my dad was he worked for one of the big accounting consultant firms, Ernst & Young. It's a international accounting firm, and he ran the Minnesota office. So, and they'd moved. My parents were from Massachusetts, but they moved to Minnesota when I was 6 for the job. I always felt like they were maybe reluctant Minnesotans, where I was a full-fledged, Minnesotan.
What's the difference?
I think that there were some cultural things about Minnesota that they did not feel as in touch with. And I guess because they were my parents and I didn't either, but things like fishing, hunting. There was a real tradition of having like lake houses, cabins, they're called colloquially, and we never had that, so there wasn't like this outdoorsness, I guess, that I guess we probably didn't participate in as much.
Right. And I've read you talk about your school years, and your grade school years sound pretty regular, but you've said that they very rapidly went downhill when you started attending Valley View Junior High. Why?
There is a combination of sort of money meets provincialism that was kind of ugly. And I was not going to be a great hockey player. I was going to, not a great athlete. And I sort of still figuring my stuff out. And so, yeah, there was a lot of bullying and stuff. And, in hindsight, it's nothing probably that a lot of kids that couldn't have gone through. But it was shitty. And I was pretty anxious to get out of there. And I did. My parents sent me to a private school, which kind of had a little more focus on arts and that kind of thing. And that changed my life, to be honest. Like, right away, I was like, met some friends, and they were like, oh, you play guitar? Do you want to start a band? And, like that was like, we hit the ground running. And it was cooler there. Like, kids were into cooler music. People were just generally nicer.
Well, you mentioned the guitar, and I know you got a guitar on your 12th birthday. Was that... what did you see in the guitar? I mean, was that at a time when you were still at Valley View Junior High, and did the guitar represent something that you could relate to, something that provided you with something?
Yeah, I mean, for one, I was already really into music, and I wanted to go examine that, and I thought that would be the first. But I wasn't like as I said about the Van Halen thing, I was never like, I'm going to just be amazing at guitar. I wanted to be in a band. I wanted to be I think it came from whether it's the Bay City Rollers or the Monkees television show. I wanted to be a part of a band. I thought that was to me what was cool. And that ended up being a really good thing for me because my parents got me a guitar, but then they signed me up for lessons. I needed to take lessons, and we went to this guitar store called New Coupe. And they signed me up, and I, walked down, and I met my teacher. His name was Chris Osgood, and he had been a member of the first, punk band in Minneapolis, the Suicide Commandos, that had signed to Plank Records with Per Ubu in the 70s. And, I was just starting to discover, punk rock, and I brought in a Ramones record to the lesson, and to see if he could show me how to play something. I knew that would be kind of probably a good place to start. And he started telling me stories about hanging out with the Ramones. And all of a sudden, it was my world kind of, there's that Clash, Lost in a Supermarket. We had a hedge in the suburbs over which I never could see. It felt like at that moment that there was someone who was explaining that there's bigger and there's more. And he was such a cool influence. I'm still friendly with him. He and they have a great record. Suicide Commandos make a record that's just one of the great punk records in my mind. And he would do this great stuff. He had a phone in his lesson room, and the phone would ring, a landline, and when he would go to answer it, he would crank up the stereo, and then he'd answer it, and then he'd turn to me and say, you always want them to think you're having a party. And he turned me on a lot of cool stuff, punk rock, but also stuff like ZZ Top and things I still really like. So that was really positive, and I really I remember that would be their lessons were on Tuesday after school, and I would really it was the weekend. I didn't care about. Tuesdays was what I cared about,
And so you saw yourself playing guitar. Guitar was where it was at for you. Yeah,
playing guitar and being in a band, and I don't think I would have had the guts to start singing then. No. But I thought if you could be in a band and write your own stuff, that seemed really cool. And things were starting to happen around. I was starting to notice music in Minneapolis. The Replacements, I think I got into when I was still at Valley View between 7th and 8th grade. And that, seeing bands of that stature and that quality, but being in my own town, made me feel like this. I've said this in other interviews, but you just didn't know people who looked like Steven Tyler or Robert Plant.
Right.
But you knew a lot of guys who looked like Paul Westerberg.
Yeah.
And there was a sense that it's possible.
And I guess even if you think about an album like Hootenanny, there's that song Run It, and it talks about running red lights, and it's actually naming songs naming streets in South Minneapolis. That, I guess, ties into that revelation to you that, wow, this is my neck of the woods. People are singing about this.
It ties into that, and again, it ties into our talk about details. I mean, like All of a Sudden, that song's in focus because it's not just about running red lights on generic streets. It's about Lyndale and Garfield and streets that I drive around. Well, I wasn't driving out, but walk around.
Yeah.
That was like really exciting to me. And the idea also that they were kind of they were sort of symbolic, but then all of a sudden they'd peel off like the greatest, most together song you've ever heard in your life. Right, so that was super exciting.
And I guess, tying into what we were just talking about street names and things like that, in terms of your songwriting, geography and place seems to be quite important. Do you think it has its base in songs such as that we just spoke about from the Replacements?
Partially. Partially also, like, I was always obsessed with maps. And even like probably around this time, like we're talking about, say, like middle school for me, I started to look at U.S. maps and like think about bands going on tour. I loved looking on like, oh, so you could do Philly, and then you can actually go from there. You could do Cleveland the next night if you want to do a big drive.
Wow.
And I started, and I've always kind of loved places and names, but and I've gotten like, even as I've toured more and more obsessed with that. Like when I watch a movie, sometimes I can't relax until I know where it's set. Like, when I'll be like squinting at license plates, things like that. But yeah, I think that is part of it. And having a sense of place is always interesting.
When you started touring, I suppose, for the first time, probably with Lifter Puller, I imagine, were you involved in the routing of tours and putting that skill and that fascination to use?
Unfortunately, I was 100%. We didn't have a booking agent. So actually, I had a day job at the time. I worked at American Express Financial Advisors, kind of at first like in a phone bank, kind of like an incoming call center. And then I actually kind of improved my lot in life a little bit and worked at a wealth management desk. But I would go down there on my lunch breaks, and this is like before email was widely used, and I would go to this bank of payphones and call clubs, and I'd try to set up tours and, say like, yeah, I think we can do that night, and shit. Well, then we need to find another show for that Friday night. Let's see if we can get one in Philly. And you just harass. I mean, like, we weren't going to bring that many people out, so it was mainly harassing people for opening slots. But we did it. That's how we ended up going on tour. And then you start networking with other bands and sharing numbers and, et cetera.
There is a band that I know of before Lifter Puller, which was no pun intended, which I believe was your school band. Is that correct? What can you tell me about no pun intended?
No pun intended. It was great. There were these really great guys that I met up with, and we got the band going my 9th grade year, and we had it all through 9th, 10, 11, 12. A lot of covers, stuff like REM, The Replacements, U2, The Police, alternative / college rock of that era. And then we started writing our own music and putting that in there. We put out a 7-inch single my senior year, but I didn't sing in that one. I was kind of like the songwriter, and I would write the words and everything, but I would give it to this singer who is still a very good friend of mine. I look back as we were smart because the singer was very both popular and good looking. So we were, I was ahead of my time as far as like recognizing that was a good thing. But eventually, I wanted to sing my own songs. But yeah, that was no pun intended. And we ended up at the end, we started playing like at the 7th Street entry, which is connected to First Avenue in Minneapolis. And so we were, opening for kind of punk rock and that kind of thing. First to 3 usually.
We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, Craig talks about forming the Hold Steady, finding success in his 30s, and much more. Welcome back to Humans of Music and my interview with Craig Finn. Before the break, Craig was talking about one of his formative musical experiences, playing in high school band, no pun intended. Another formative experience for Craig was attending hardcore matinee shows at clubs like First Avenue in Minneapolis, which is where we pick up the conversation.
So First Avenue in Minneapolis was really amazing in that they had all these all ages shows, like hardcore shows, and they would all ages, and I would go quite often. Pretty much if they had one, I would go. And so if there was going to be 4 bands starting at they'd be in the afternoon after school, 4 p.m. And honestly, like if they said doors at 4, I'd be there at 3:45 because I didn't want to miss any of it. And, nowadays, you're after a lifetime in rock and roll, you're like, okay, the headliner's going on at 10, let's get there at 9:58. But back then I didn't want to miss any band. And I loved seeing how they plugged in, what cables they were using, I mean, there was just it was being able to see something up close. And I'd been to that was such a revelation to go to shows versus concerts, Okay. I mean, to go to something with 100 people at it rather than 10,000, and being able to walk right up to the stage and seeing what pedals they were using. And that was really, really cool. And that just seeing a lot of things was very kind of thrilling to me, but also educational.
Yeah. Was there a particular gig? Was there a band that these days is regarded as, legendary, I suppose, in that scene? Was there but at that point they were just another band who were playing. Was there a gig that you can remember of seeing someone with 100 people?
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, I saw the Replacements for the first time in the 7th Street entry, which holds about 250, but it was pretty packed. So Soul Asylum was the band that they were there was kind of a holy trinity of Minneapolis. There was the Replacements and Husker Du, and they were a little bit older. And then Soul Asylum was just a little younger than them, and but really squared into when I started going to shows. And Dave Pertner, the lead singer's little brother, was someone I started to get to know a little bit. And I would go see them, and I think the first time I saw them, there was probably, I don't know, it was their second record, Made to Be Broken's record release show, but the all ages version. So probably had a good crowd at the ID show that night, but for the kids, there was probably only about 50 of us there. And it was incredible. And I would see that band. I mean, I think that's the band I've paid to see the most. I've seen, after a lifetime in rock, I've seen a lot of bands a lot, but that is the band I've, consistently would fork over money and go see, and, wasn't on the guest list or anything like that. It was just, so excited. And they were just incredible live band.
Yeah. So as you see bands like Soul Asylum then go on and break big, is that showing you that this is possible? When you're in Lift to Puller, this can happen.
Yeah, it sort of did. I mean, what happened, I went off to college in 89 and then stayed there till 93 and didn't do a ton of music. I had a band for the last semester I was there. But, so we probably played, 6 or 8 gigs. But during that time, Nirvana happened and Kurt Cobain. And it sounds crazy to say now. But, prior to Kurt Cobain, I just remember being if you wanted an independent record, you had to go to an independent record store. So there was the music I was listening to was not available at the mainstream record store for the most part. And all of a sudden that got blurry, right? And what was mainstream and what was popular and that got mixed up. And so into that world, Lifter Puller came out, and we were not super ambitious, but I remember one thing, just to think about that post-Nirvana world is I remember Lifter Pullers played our first show, and about a week later, I got a call, and it was someone from MCA Records saying, I heard that your first show was really good, and I'm going to come see you at your second show. And I was kind of well, we're not ready. I mean, we aren't what I hope we, and I don't think I don't think she was probably, I don't even think I even met her
right
at the show, or who knows if she made it. But the point is, there was this sort of feeding frenzy. So that was, that was the 90s. But, we started to get a good following, and but as we started to tour, We weren't really connecting. We weren't on like, we hadn't really like found a label or a booking agent. So, we could play for hundreds of people in Minneapolis, but, Chicago might be more like 40. And so, that did start to feel like banging our heads against the wall a little bit, because we did have ambitions of wanting to, take it to as many people as possible. Although I think we also realized our sound was, not going to be an easy fit for the radio, etc.
Sure. How long did it take you to feel comfortable as the frontman?
Pretty quickly, because I sort of developed my own style. Like I developed this sort of talking style that, and that's kind of one beat per syllable, like I don't hold a lot of notes. There's not a lot of, woo, so it's da, da, da. So once I got that going, I got pretty comfortable that I could do that. And I was confident, not cocky, but I was confident in the words I was writing. And there was enough part of the material that, like, things would drop out and people could really hear the words. Not always, but sometimes. And people reacted to it, so right away people were saying, wow, that was a cool song. I like that line, and so that made me feel like I could do it. But again, much like, no pun intended, Lifter Puller stuck around for a while and got better and better and better. And we just kind of found our own sort of sound, found our strengths. And, I like the whole steady, steady is sort of a theme, like, because like that's, that what we were kind of like, slow and steady wins the race. I think we developed our thing for a while, after a while. And I do also say that Lifter Puller, when I look back, I'm very proud of the work ethic, because, like, I remember, like, even our friends who were in bands, like, how much are you guys going to rehearse? And it's like, a lot. We're going to do it a lot,
So you were very driven, even though you had this, I think it was American Express that you mentioned. So you had a good job. You still saw your future in this life.
Yeah, the job was just to pay the bills. And I think, like, I'm almost 50 now. And when I look back, I think that one of the advantages people who go to like art school or things like that, they really have is learning early to identify as an artist, where I didn't do that. And I think it took me longer than most to understand it. Maybe it took me into my early 30s to fully understand and grasp myself as an artist, because I don't think I did that until I actually like was doing it for a living. And I think you can do it before, I think you can commit to it and maybe save yourself some hardship if you really believe in yourself.
Right. And you said you're almost 50, but I've also read that you said you had your midlife crisis at 28. You moved to New York and you had your midlife crisis then. Why? What was happening?
Well, Lifter Puller broke up. And I sort of was like, what am I doing? I don't know. What do I want to do? And I wasn't sure if I wanted to play music, because I'd sort of burned out, especially with all the like booking their own tours and all that, I thought New York might hold some answer, and I wasn't sure what it was, but I knew a lot of people there. It seemed like an easy transition. And also it felt like the people I knew there were, doing creative things and in some cases making a living from it. And I wanted something. There was something about in New York. I felt like the creative people I knew took it really seriously, meaning like showed up on time, showed up having done the homework, ready to work. There was a commitment to this creative, to finding success creatively. And I that attracted me.
Once the Hold Steady formed, did you sense that you had something?
Pretty quickly. So Tad had played bass in the last few years of Lifter Puller, but he's an amazing guitar player. And, he moved to New York and we started to get the Hold Steady together. And just hearing him play was really fun. But our expectations were very managed. And almost hilariously so when I look back. Because I remember thinking, like, the thing I didn't like about the end of Lifter Puller, besides, like, the touring and all that, is, like, the van was always breaking down. And all of a sudden, you were supposed to be in a rock band, but all you were learning about was automotive, So I was like, like, the trouble starts when you leave the house, right? So why don't we just, like, play our songs in this space, drink beer, and we'll have a good time. No pressure, And then someone convinced us to play a show, and we went and did that. And then we played another, and then someone asked, then it's like, well, we might as well record these songs that we've written. But people reacted to it. I mean, the other thing that happened is Lifter Puller, in the time between Lifter Puller and the Hold Steady, which was about 2 years, people had discovered Lifter Puller a little bit, and people had started talking about music on the internet, on message boards.
Right.
And so when the Hold Steady played our first show, it wasn't like a massive amount of people, but it was a lot of people for a first show. Like it was over 100 people, I think, and so people cared. And the difference between Minneapolis and New York is, if Minneapolis, you play, and, maybe the guy who writes at the local weekly shows up and gives you a good review. In New York, that's the guy from Rolling Stone.
Right.
So, all of a sudden, some of your press is more on a national level. And so that way things started happening quickly. And then it did feel like we're onto something.
But finding that acceptance in your 30s, and I suppose the international attention in your 30s, as opposed to if that had happened in your early 20s, did it give you a different perspective on it?
I think it probably was good in some way. I mean, I think that my behavior was probably a lot better I can't imagine. I mean, I don't consider myself having to be a developed person at 21. So if you would have thrown fame into that would have been probably my perspective would have made it pretty bratty, I would think. And I sort of, I think that's probably a logical conclusion for a lot of people. But in my 30s, like for instance, going to tour internationally, I hadn't traveled before. I mean, not like that. So to be in, to be in Paris or London or Glasgow, there's like, well, I have a day off. I'm not going to just sit in my hotel room and drink beer. Like I got it. Is there a cathedral or something I can see? And I felt honored to be able to do that. And so I do think took advantage of some of those kind of things.
Was there a suspicion on, did you feel slightly suspicious of, I guess, the trappings of fame, the increased expectations, the promotional responsibilities, the voices around you?
I thought that at first that they would just take it all away. I thought there's sort of this sort of imposter syndrome, or like, wow, it's pretty cute they allowed us to do this, but this must be some sort of fluke or something. And I do think like my relationship with touring was like around Boys and Girls in America, our third record, where I was like, okay, this is going to happen for a while now. And so like if they give you, just the partying stuff, like they give you a bottle of whiskey, they're going to give you another one tomorrow night. There's no pressure to drink the one tonight, like you're not missing any whiskey. So I think that there was a realization in a way to kind of get healthier and approach touring differently after a few years to make sure we're in it for the long haul.
Well, that's interesting because I think I'd seen an interview with you where you were talking about your creativity and how you write. And in the early days of the Hold Steady, it was in a hungover state that you would feel more creative, or you would just be able to connect on a certain creative level. So when you started to clean up, how did that change?
Well, that's absolutely true. I being hungover, I find is there's a dark comedy that pervades everything that I find really useful to my voice. And so when I did start to clean up and it was like I can't just write hungover, I was concerned. But I started to really punch the clock, which remains my creative process. Always writing and figuring out later if it's any good. But I mean, one of the first things that came out of that period was Stuck Between Stations, which is one of the Hold Steady's most beloved songs, which talks about art and depression and alcohol and its relationship and all that. And I knew when I wrote that, I thought it was good. I only wrote the words. I wrote it to a piece of music that Tad had given me. But I realized that, again, this is a job. This is serious. If I want to be serious about it, I have to put the work in. I can't walk around waiting for the inspiration to hit you. You have to go chase it.
That's that Nick Cave approach. Sit down at 9 or 10 in the morning and write until 4 or 5, and then go home.
Yeah, I mean, and Nick Cave is a huge inspiration to me, especially in the past 10, 15 years of like learning about how he does that and trying to emulate that of like, and I find now and for a while now that my best stuff's in the morning, like getting, walking the dog and then like starting to, pile on the caffeine and let my morning brain interact with caffeine and getting that out. And then, by noon, by lunchtime, a little after lunchtime, that's when the phone starts to ring about stuff. And that's like, okay, well then you start to like, I start to taper off into kind of administrative stuff.
Sure.
But I try to keep the mornings to like, this is, and it's almost like pushing stuff out and then visiting it later to see if it makes sense or if it's worthwhile.
You mentioned that the word steady in the Hold Steady's name is very important because I think when you formed the Hold Steady, the idea is that you wanted to form something that would last, something that would be steady and would have durability. But then you mentioned earlier Boys and Girls in America, and that album just sort of started to go up and your profile went up. And then I guess it plateaued to an extent. Mm-hmm. How do you cope with that once things start to plateau? Are you just happy that, again, it comes back to the steadiness that you're fine with as long as it's steady?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think that like, yeah, I mean, I think like finding a place where it works. I mean, I think if it plateaued lower, meaning like, like where we didn't have an audience that was as committed, because what happens is that we have a group of community around the band, really, not just fans, but a community that is incredible. I mean, incredibly committed in a way that I think rivals any band. And so, what's happened is it hasn't been maybe so much about trying to expand, because at some point that is the stuff that kind of kills you. I mean, being in Kansas City and getting up out of bed to do the morning show, to try to get more people at the show or, sell a few more tickets. Like that's the stuff that just that's not creative, right? So I think what we found with this band, which has been, it took us a little bit, but I think in the past 5 years especially, found a way to engage with this amazing community while keeping like the creativity at a peak and, being able to continually work on new music with each other. Some through the aid of technology and, the miracle of that. But also being able to, we've changed the way I've toured, and instead of going out and playing, a month's worth of shows, rolling into small, Midwestern cities on a Monday night, we tend to say like, hey, we're gonna go to Chicago and we're gonna play 3 shows. And if you want to see it, you live in the region, come hang with us. We have like 120 songs now, so we can make the sets very different each night, I really think as much has changed in the music industry as far as how people listen to music, how artists get paid, etc., that it doesn't make you any less of a band or any less of a real concern if you aren't like trying to always get quote unquote bigger. Because I think what we found is doing things on our own terms has an equal effect. Right. And that includes going where we want to go, doing only the press we want to do. And then, doing, everything that gives us pleasure, but nothing that kind of gives us pain. Yeah. And that's, that's a luxury you have after 15 years plus.
Which is a good learning. But just having that durability, it's one thing to say we want things to be steady, we want things to be durable, but it takes effort, it takes a lot of work. Have there been particular periods in your career that have challenged that ability for longevity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, Heaven is Whenever, our 5th record, was a real... Franz left the band, and there was some internal, behind the music style stuff, substance abuse and whatnot, that was rearing its head. And I think overall there was a fatigue and sort of maybe a lack of ideas. And we'd been touring so much, like our sort of only answer was like, let's make another record and go on tour because that's what we do. And I also think that there was a sense of like, this is all in hindsight, and hindsight's 20/20. But I think that there was a sense of like, well, no one really wants to go get a stop this and go get a job. And that's the worst worst reason to make any decisions, because that does not bode well for creativity or music. And I think the first people who can detect that lack of joy is your fans. I mean, I think that they have the strongest bullshit detector. So, but this is all hindsight being 2020. I was there. I was signing off on everything, so I didn't necessarily know about it, I wasn't aware of it because I was in the middle of it. But I think that was a rough period that we had to figure out. And even the next few years, the plus side of that is Steve Selvage joined the Hold Steady, who remains a huge part of the band today. And then Franz came back in 2016, and now we have a 6-piece Hold Steady, which I jokingly call the Super Steady or Hold Steady 3.0, which I can honestly say is the best version of the band we've ever had, and that feels lucky. This far in.
Yeah. Last couple of things. You talked earlier about developing your style, and once you hit on that style vocally, you felt quite confident. How did you find that style? Were there people that were influences? Was it something that you just developed over time?
Yeah, both. I think like there was something almost physical about it too. One thing I found is that, in practice spaces with crappy PAs, barking out things, cut through. So, it was some of it was to hear myself. And, too obvious would be Lou Reed, Marquis Smith from The Fall, and then but then mixed with something like a little more Heartland, like Bruce Springsteen, who's certainly an influence on my writing. And those kind of ranters and talkers mixed with something that was more anthemic, like a Springsteen or something like that.
Sure. Very last thing, Jaxsta is all about giving credit where credit is due. Are there people that you give credit to for helping you get where you are today?
Yeah, a lot of people. I wouldn't be able to start, but I'm blessed to have good managers that have guided me well. Dave Gottlieb currently manages the Hold Steady in my solo career that have been amazing, and Josh Kaufman has produced my last 3 solo records as well as the last 2 Hold Steady records. Has been an incredible collaborator outside of the band. But it all kind of goes back to Chris Osgood in that guitar lesson room, who kind of opened my eyes and blew my mind, and to music like the Suicide Commandos and all the stuff that he told me, not just about chords and finger positions, but also about life and about rock and roll, how rock and roll is possible.
Nice. Craig, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you talking to me.
Oh, that was such a pleasure. Well, I appreciate it was a great talk, so I appreciate all your research. You came in very, very informed, so that makes it easy for me.
And that's it for another episode of Humans of Music. Big thanks to Craig for his time, and thank you for listening. This episode was mixed by Lachlan Mitchell from Parliament Studios in Annandale, and the incidental music and theme song were written and performed by Sam Lockwood. Please remember to subscribe to the Humans of Music podcast so you never miss an episode, or even better, share it amongst your friends and rate and review it. And remember, next time you need to know who wrote a song, who produced a song, who engineered it, who played on it, who sang on it, who did anything on it, head to jaxsta.com for all your official music credit information. Until the next episode of Humans of Music, I'm Rod Yates. Thanks for listening.